They bullied his wife in public, now they live in fear of the quiet man they provoked. The street was alive with the hum of a late summer evening in Harlem, the kind of night where the air carried the weight of hope and history. Marcus Thompson, a man of few words, walked hand in hand with his wife, Aisha, their steps in sync as they navigated the crowded sidewalk. Marcus, a carpenter with hands calloused from years of crafting furniture, had a quiet strength that didn't demand attention but commanded respect. Aisha, a nurse with a smile that could light up a room, was his anchor, her laughter a melody that softened his edges. They were a couple who had weathered storms, poverty, loss, and the subtle sting of prejudice, but their love was a fortress, unyielding and fierce. Tonight, though, that fortress was tested. As they passed a corner store, a group of 3 young men, their voices loud and laced with bravado, blocked their path. The leader, a wiry man named Trey, sneered at Aisha, his words dripping with venom. "What's a fine sister like you doing with a nobody like him?" he taunted, his friends laughing as if it were a game. Aisha's grip on Marcus's hand tightened, her eyes flashing with defiance, but the hurt was clear. The crowd around them slowed, some whispering, others turning away, unwilling to intervene. Marcus stood still, his face unreadable, but his silence was a storm gathering strength. Aisha, ever the peacemaker, tried to pull him away, her voice low. "Let's go, Marcus. They're not worth it." But Trey stepped closer, his words growing uglier, targeting Aisha's dark skin, her braided hair, her very existence. "You think you're better than us? Walking around like you own this place." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of discomfort and curiosity, but no one stepped forward. Then, a new voice cut through the tension, sharp and unexpected. It was Mrs. Carter, an elderly woman who ran the corner bodega, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She leaned on her cane, her eyes blazing with a fire that belied her age. "You boys think you're tough, picking on a woman who's done nothing but good for this community?" she snapped, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent watching Harlem's struggles. The crowd shifted, some nodding in agreement, others suddenly finding the courage to glare at Trey and his crew. Mrs. Carter's intervention was the twist no one saw coming, a frail figure turning the tide with her moral authority. Trey faltered, his bravado cracking under the weight of her words, but he doubled down, turning his venom on Marcus. "What's the matter, man? Too weak to fight for your girl?" Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Instead, he stepped forward, placing himself between Aisha and the group, his broad shoulders a shield. The air grew heavy, the moment teetering on the edge of violence. Aisha's eyes pleaded with him to walk away, but Marcus's silence was louder than any shout. It was a silence that said, "I see you, I know you, and I will not let you break us." The confrontation ended as quickly as it began. Trey's friends, sensing the crowd's growing disapproval, pulled him back, muttering excuses as they retreated into the night. But the damage was done. Aisha's hands trembled as she and Marcus continued their walk home, the joy of their evening stolen. Yet, in that moment, something shifted in Marcus. The quiet man, who had always chosen peace over conflict, felt a fire ignite within him, not for revenge, but for justice. Over the next few weeks, Marcus didn't seek out Trey or his crew. He didn't need to. Harlem was a small world, and word spread fast. Marcus began volunteering at the community center, teaching woodworking to kids, many of whom knew Trey's crew by name. He listened to their stories, their frustrations, their dreams, and offered them something Trey never could: respect. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. He told the kids about Aisha, about her strength, about how she'd worked double shifts during the pandemic to save lives. He didn't mention the incident, but the kids pieced it together. They saw Marcus not as a victim, but as a man who stood tall without raising a fist. Mrs. Carter, too, became an unlikely ally. She started inviting Aisha to speak at her church group, where women gathered to share stories of resilience. Aisha's voice, once shaken by Trey's cruelty, grew stronger as she spoke about love, dignity, and the pain of being judged for her skin. The community listened, and slowly the narrative shifted. Trey and his crew, once loud and untouchable, found themselves sidelined. The corner store became a place where people gathered to talk about change, not conflict. The kids Marcus mentored began calling out Trey's behavior, their loyalty shifting to the man who showed them a better way. One evening, months later, Trey approached Marcus outside the community center. The crowd tensed, expecting a fight, but Trey's shoulders were slumped, his bravado gone. "I was wrong," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know about her. About you." Marcus looked at him, his eyes steady but not unkind. "It's not about me," he said. "It's about her, and it's about all of us." Trey nodded, unable to meet Marcus's gaze, and walked away. The crowd exhaled, a quiet victory settling over them. Aisha, watching from the community center's doorway, smiled softly. She knew Marcus's strength wasn't in his silence but in his actions, the way he built bridges instead of walls, the way he turned pain into purpose. Their love, tested by hate, had become a beacon for others. Harlem hadn't changed overnight, but it was changing one conversation, one act of courage at a time. The story of Marcus and Aisha spread beyond the streets, carried by those who witnessed it and those who heard it secondhand. It wasn't just about a man defending his wife. It was about a community reclaiming its heart. Mrs. Carter's voice, Marcus's quiet resolve, and Aisha's unwavering grace had turned a moment of cruelty into a movement of compassion. Trey and his crew, once feared, now lived in the shadow of their own actions, their influence diminished by the quiet man they had underestimated. In the end, Marcus and Aisha walked the same streets, hand in hand, their love unbroken. They didn't seek revenge. They sought healing. And in doing so, they showed a community that justice isn't always loud. It's in the quiet acts of standing up, speaking out, and building something better. What do you think? Can one person's courage change a community's heart? Or is justice always a collective fight?